welcome to Counting the Cost, Al Jazeera's business program. I'm Imran Gavda. Each week we bring you the most important business and economic news from around the globe. Coming up on this show, homeward bound, migrant workers are hit hard by the recession. A double dip, economists predict weeds among the green shoots. From plastic to fantastic, how luxury goods are transforming Taiwan's image. With the world grappling with the economic slowdown, hundreds of thousands of people are out of work. In the developing world, the few jobs available pay little, making the money that flows back from expatriate workers a lifesaver. Officially, recorded remittances registered double-digit annual growth in the past few years. But in line with the downward spiral of the economy, the World Bank predicts that remittance flow will drop from last year's high of $305 billion to $209 billion in 2009. This expected fall will cause hardships in many poor countries. Well, according to the International Labour Organization, there are an estimated 200 million people who have left their home countries to work overseas. Among the countries with the largest number of migrant labourers is India, which was the top recipient of remittances with $45 billion in 2008. China came next with $34 billion. Followed by Mexico with $26 billion, the Philippines $18 billion, and Poland with $11 billion. Well, remittances provide a lifeline to many poor countries. But what happens to those who have lost their jobs and are forced to return home, jobless and penniless? Prerna Suri has more.
It's been a week since Kalagonda Naresh's son, Prasad, took his own life. Prasad came back to India after losing his job in Dubai. Unable to pay his debts, he saw suicide as his only way out. His daughter still cries for him. His wife, Lakshmi, is still in shock.
2 hours after coming back, he killed himself. He never told me anything about what happened. Then a week ago, I went to find out what happened from the agents. Even they didn't tell me anything. I was hoping to get some answers.
Prasad's story is not unique. In this village, almost every other person has migrated in search of a better livelihood. But the global economic crisis, which has hit many economies, has meant that many of them have had to come back. And they say back home, the situation is equally grim. The spectre of the economic crisis looms large here in the southern Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. Vidya Sagar bought this motorcycle from his savings of 7 years working as a construction worker in Dubai. He earned around $200 a month. But like many of his friends, his work ended when the economy stalled.
They
asked me to go for a week's leave, and now I have been here already for 40 days, and they haven't asked me to come back. I call them up every day, and they give me excuses.
Kotapatti Narasimham Naidu, a social activist in this area, tells me the impact of this reverse exodus, both socially and economically, has been devastating.
After coming back to India, they can't find a job, and the loans they took keep rising, and because of this, many commit suicide, and the government isn't doing much.
Lakshmi doesn't even have the luxury of mourning for her husband. Clearing the family's loans now rests on her shoulders.
I have nothing left with me other than my daughters. They are now my responsibility.
The global economic crisis has not only taken away Lakshmi's husband, but also her dreams of a better life. Prerna Suri, Al Jazeera, Tegam village in Andhra Pradesh.
Well, joining us from Geneva to discuss how migrants are faring in the recession is Dr. Ibrahim Awad, the director of the migration program at the International Labour Organization. Thanks a lot for joining us. As we just saw in Prerna Suri's report, economic migrants losing their jobs, returning home, some even committing suicide. Is this hurting India's economy?
Well, it depends at which level you're doing the analysis. The global recession has had differentiated impact on migrant workers in different regions and on their countries of origin. If you take India in particular, of course, at the micro level, the migrant workers who lose their jobs, who return to their home countries, will be suffering. Their families will be suffering. They may have incurred debts to migrate. But if you take the macro level perspective, things might be different. I do not expect the Indian economy to be seriously, gravely affected by the consequences of the crisis.
On a broad scale, when times are tough, as they have been around the globe for the past year, they may not be the only victims, but are migrants, laborers, usually the first victims?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you can formulate the hypothesis, and the hypothesis will prove true in many cases, in most cases probably. However, again, you have to distinguish and to differentiate. But let me return to my argument, because there is a second reason for the Indian economy not to be affected specifically by return migration. Of course, it will be affected by other factors. The second is that the remittances to India represent 3.1%. In 2007, represented 3.1% of the Indian economy, of the gross domestic product. This is not that significant. The Indian economy is extremely large. Compare the situation to countries where remittances represented 24% of GDP, 38% of GDP, and in one country, Tajikistan, where remittances represented 45.5% of the economy of GDP. So imagine a drop of 10%, what it can have as multiplier effect. And the Indian economy is a large economy, and therefore the impact of the return of migrant workers, I do not expect it. Well,
you mentioned India, you mentioned Tajikistan as well, both considered so-called developing countries. I wonder, what about developed countries? Is there a big difference between the two? Does the plight of migrants in a time of economic instability differ between the so-called developing and developed world?
You see, the situation is different because India, Tajikistan, Egypt, the Philippines are developing countries which are countries of origin of migrant workers. They send migrant workers. The industrialized countries receive migrant workers. And there it is the contraction of the economy, the recession, that has led to a great number of migrant workers, large numbers of migrant workers to be laid off. There, the impact is on migrant workers and through them on their countries of origin. It is not that industrialized countries were receiving large remittances that will see these remittances drop. You see, you have two opposing situations, in fact.
Dr. Ibrahim Awad in Geneva, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, as we've heard, it's not just in the developing world that the slowdown is taking its toll on migrant workers. Let's cross to London now, where Sama Shehat explains.
Thank you. Well, in the boom years, Russia transformed itself into an avidly consumer society. And many traders from Russia's Asian neighbors flocked in to satisfy the demand left by years of Soviet shortages. But as the recession takes hold, officials in Moscow are turning against these traders in what was until recently Europe's biggest market. From there, Neve Barker reports.
Migrant workers crowd the entrance to Cherkizovsky market. When it closed down 2 months ago, up to 100,000 people from China, Central Asia and Eastern Europe were left in dire financial straits. Dozens who came to Russia illegally have been deported. Others have been left pondering an uncertain future. All they can do now is gather what remaining stock they can and leave.
I'm going home. I can't work in Moscow anymore now that the market's closed. In other markets, the rent's too high. What can I do?
Cherkizovsky sprang up after the collapse of the Soviet Union. an explosion of raw commerce that fast became Europe's biggest market.
We've been here for years. Look at all the people who are here that don't have any work anymore. It's extremely bad.
Thousands worked and even lived in the market's bustling alleyways. It had its own courts, police and reportedly even brothels, all beyond the authorities' control. But now that the market has been shut down, it closes all options for a vast number of workers who find it impossible to make a living anywhere else. The authorities insist Cherkizovsky was a hotbed of crime and a breeding ground for disease. But many say the market was closed because it threatened Russia's native workforce.
This is a protectionist measure. And one of our papers revealed a confidential document of a Ministry of Trade, I think, which says that this is kind of unfair for Russian light industry, because this competition of cheap goods from that are imported actually in Russia does not allow the Russian industry to develop.
But all this leaves thousands of people, many of them escaping poverty at home, in a precarious position.
Most of the people who lost their work are refugees. These people cannot go back to their countries. They will be in a very difficult situation there. They cannot even think about going back.
Russia has the second largest migrant workforce in the world after the United States. But as the country struggles with the fallout of the economic crisis, many migrants who came to Russia looking for a better life have been left with nothing but hardship. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Well, coming up after the break, how the label Made in Taiwan is taking on a new meaning.